So welcome to another QuakeCoRE seminar, and this time I'll introduce, my name's Ken Elwood as the Research Director of QuakeCoRE, and at Auckland we are a bit distributed in different campuses, so Alice is actually giving this presentation in another location, but thought it'd be worthwhile for me to do the introduction as we are colleagues at the University of Auckland. So Alice is a senior lecturer here at University of Auckland in construction management, has done considerable work in disaster risk reduction and has significant experience in this regard, doing some consulting with the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Secretariat, doing work with brands, as well as CARE International after the tsunami in Banda Aceh in 2008. So extensive experience and writings in this field. And so today she's going to give us a presentation on quantification of infrastructure downtime and earthquake reconstruction. So over to you, Alice. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Ken. Thanks for your introduction. I'm very pleased to today talk about the research projects funded by QuakeCoRE under the flagship 5 over the past nearly 3 years. So I think it's a very significant undertaking. So I'm presenting on behalf of all my other colleagues who have worked with me over the past 3 years, like Charlotte, Erica, and everyone know them very well, and Nikki, Gary, and also my master student, Sam Wilson, and Roger. So I also want to give a great thanks to everyone who have actually contributed to the successful completion of this project so far, including the UC Quake Center people like Greg Preston, ex-SCIRT CEO or ex-NCTIR General Manager Duncan Give, and also many other people who involved with the SCIRT and NCTIR who actually have facilitated the data collection for this project, as well as people in Christchurch City Council, Kaikōura District Council, and also Engineering New Zealand and New Zealand Lifelines Group. A big thanks to everyone. So I just really want to take this opportunity to acknowledge everyone's contribution. Right. So I think this presentation, I've only got 40 minutes, but
Alice, sorry to interrupt. Are you able to set your display settings to replicate? We see the note screen.
Okay.
On display settings at the top.
Setting.
Display settings at the very top.
Okay, yep.
Duplicate.
Can you say only one slide?
Very
now?
good.
Okay, cool. So I think I will first talk about why this topic. So why we should really care about the cost and time of earthquake reconstruction. And also I will split this project in 2 sections. One, I'll briefly introduce our system dynamics model, which I actually have presented before to the flagship 5 community, but I possibly want to spend a little bit more time on our phase 2, the quantification part of infrastructure downtime. So I think first I want to really kind of like bring everyone the memories back about the previous disaster events. Those are all the events actually have been involved in terms of having reconnaissance trips or longitudinal case studies in different countries. So if you look at the losses or the repair cost of all these different events, so what really struck me, was really 3 events I actually highlighted, like the Hurricane Katrina in the States and also the Wenchuan earthquake. Of course, you possibly also saw the Japanese earthquake and tsunami in 2011, which also cost more than like $200 billion. But in comparison in New Zealand, the overall estimated cost was still remained at $40 billion. I think if we only look at the general losses and estimated cost for repair all the damaged assets and infrastructure, it didn't actually give us much information. But if we look at the ratio of this loss in comparison with the national GDP at the time, I think it would give us another insight, which means in comparison, the $40 billion losses in New Zealand was actually very significant to the country, as it actually accounts for nearly 90% of the national GDP, whereas in the US or in China or even in Japan, so the amount of the damage pretty much accounted for like between 1% to 3% of the national GDP. So this actually tells me that in New Zealand, the Canterbury earthquakes was a national event. But if we look at the reconstruction time of the past events, for instance, if we look at New Orleans, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina, but until now, it's nearly more than 10 years, more than 10 years. So only still half of the kind of like the communities or building stocks were reinstated. Whereas in Kobe, so like last year I was still in Kobe. So Kobe is still recovering. So it took Kobe nearly 20 years. But if we look at, for instance, China, so last year I visited Wenchuan area in China because last year was the 10 years anniversary of Wenchuan earthquake. So I'm pretty much confident to say that the reconstruction in China was nearly complete by the time I visited, whereas in Christchurch, so a little bit more conservative estimation was that Christchurch earthquake recovery is going to take also another, perhaps like similar time frame as Japan, like 20 years time. And you can see that in the end, there will be a very long tail of the reconstruction. So the question is, what actually makes a difference in terms of reconstruction time? For instance, if you go to any community, like for me personally, I've been to different communities affected by different disaster events, including Christchurch. If you ask people the question, when do you want your house to be built or repaired? And then the immediate response for most of people would be tomorrow. So they want everything to be repaired and rebuilt as soon as possible so that they can get back to their so-called normal life. So the question is how we can improve our understanding of what's actually really driving the reconstruction time frame. What really makes a fundamental difference in the time path of different events. So this is what motivated us to really gain this understanding. For this research project, there are 2 phases. So we were successfully funded by QuakeCoRE in phase 1 from 2017. And in nearly 2 years' time, we tried to really understand what fundamentally differentiates the earthquake rebuilding time path in Christchurch. We look at 3 sectors. So not only infrastructure sector, but also residential, housing sector, and also commercial sector. Whereas in phase 2, so from 2018 onwards until now so far, we try to explain to what extent each identified critical factor actually play a role in influencing the earthquake rebuilding time. But in this case, we only focus on the horizontal infrastructure recovery, and we also compare the infrastructure recovery in Christchurch with that is in Kaikōura. So I'll briefly explain phase one, what we have done. In New Zealand, so following the Canterbury earthquakes, we actually have some existing rebuild forecast models, done by different organizations like SCIRT and NBIE had earthquake recovery forecast models. Those models were pretty much shared across the different recovery agencies and organizations. We also have like the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research. They have their own forecast, as well as Reserve Bank and Westpac. At different stages, they all try to forecast what the profile of reconstruction would look like. But the challenge is, what we have found, well, we have those very good construction forecast model, but the construction sector still find it difficult in forward planning the resources and also the associated rebuild activities. The reason is solely based on the intentions of spending to predict reconstruction time path is not really sufficient. What we really need to understand is more about what is actually happening during the reconstruction process, and then how we can make sure once we have identified those critical factors, we can manipulate those factors to achieve a more speedy recovery. So what we tend to do is we try to use a different approach by using the system dynamics model. So what this model does was to consider the damaged building stock as a system, and then when model is changed over the entire reconstruction time, try to understand the dynamics underlying the question about why certain things happening. Yeah. So I think one thing I want to highlight is more about our approach. One is really intended to reveal the insights about what really takes a toll on the reconstruction schedule, and also try to explain from we have a model to what kind of insights we can offer to the industry, to the government agencies. So we found that the system dynamics model can be a very good tool to move all these conversations forward. Also quickly explain our methodology. We divided the entire reconstruction process of the built environment into 4 stages, starting from inspection, like damage assessment, and then move to decision making. Decision making here actually involves land zoning, all this planning, and also set up the SCIRT, the governance institution arrangements for recovery whatsoever. So all the critical decisions involved for overall recovery. After all the decisions made, so then it comes to the financing and the planning stage for the damaged assets. For instance, for the residential sector, it has to do with the insurance payout, the whole process. And then what kind of design, what kind of foundations, for instance, should be put in place for a particular house. So there's a lot of planning involved in this stage. Once everything has been in place, and then so that can move to the repairing and rebuilding stage. So what we try to do is, we can say for one damaged facility, whether it is a residential house, or it is a piece of infrastructure, or if it is a commercial building. So how we can model this facility from the damaged state, and then it changes over time to its full recovery states. So I actually try to use this diagram to show what do we try to do is using the system dynamics modeling to investigate how a given building stock can change over time from the damaged state to the full recovery state. I'll quickly brush off these parts because it's pretty much to do with some system dynamics, modeling terminology and jargons. I'll try to explain as simple as I can. So this is more like a causal diagram to illustrate what we say. For instance, a damaged structure, after the inspecting and assessing, then we have to go through the decision-making process. Then this is another stock. We can name it as structures under decision rules. After the financing and planning, then we can say, this is a stock. We can call it structures ready for repairs and rebuilds. And then certain time, then this stock can move to another state called structures working in progress or under work. So this part is really the physical construction process. But for a damaged building or a piece of infrastructure to move into this physical construction process, it has to go through the entire preceding procedures. So then here is more mathematical representation of how one facility can change from the damaged state to, in the end, the full recovery state. We also actually, by doing the interviews with a large number of stakeholders and also the construction industry practitioners, government agencies, we have also identified conceptually the critical mechanisms affecting the rebuild recovery time in general in the 3 sectors. So those mechanisms fall into 4 categories. So, of course, planning and regulation play a major role. And also the second one is not a surprise, it's always resource constraint, the capability of the engineering construction sector. And then a financing mechanism, including like the insurance settlement process, and also the decision-making time needed and actions of different facility owners all play a part in influencing the rebuild time. So this is what we try to do, is actually say how we can actually make sure we populate the data we have got into a system dynamics model. Then we use mathematical relationships to try to represent the different time delays and also how the different time delays can aggregate together or they interdepend on each other to make the recovery time a big difference in the end. So for this one, this is a simplified system dynamics model for the residential sector. So here you can see that, again, from the initial damaged state until later, for the PMO, project management offices, to complete a repair process. There's some houses from here after the decision making. There will be houses, some certain number of the houses will be handed over to PMOs, whereas others will be cash payment. So we try to actually model these 2 different streams of houses, one with the PMOs and then the other stream was with the homeowners. Of course, the entire repair and rebuilding process cannot stand alone. We can also say that the labor sector, especially the construction sector, its capability influences how fast the repair and rebuild can take place. At the same time, we have noticed the business as usual sector, mainly the subdivisions in Christchurch, they have gained momentum after the rebuild started. So a lot of resources from the rebuild sector have been joined to the business as usual sector, but also the entire reconstruction plus the business as usual construction have also been dominated by the rates. So it's kind of like the cost. Well, here I put it as a unit cost for construction. And then that will also demonstrate the interplay between the cost and time of reconstruction. So then we run a space simulation based on the data we've got. So you can say, give you a quick example. For the PMO finished houses, there's certain oscillation happening here, which is very unusual or which is very odd. Okay. And then what we do is, so we actually try to play around the model we've got to say if we change certain ways of how the construction sector perceives the construction demand, whether we can change the model behavior or the results of the system. So what we did was actually change the certain links is more about where the reconstruction is undertaking, is taking place. At the same time, the construction sector can also have a clear visibility of the business as usual, what's happening not only in subdivision areas in Christchurch, but also like in Auckland, nationwide, in Wellington, the infrastructure development happening in other major cities in New Zealand. At the same time, they have a very good understanding about their capability and resources. So then what would happen? So this is what we've got. So we get a nice result, which means there's no oscillation, there's no waste of time, and also so not a waste of resources. So then we have identified the critical parameters that actually really play a role underlining to control the entire shape of the resulting pathways. So I listed a few. Those are the top parameters I think should draw our attention. The first one is we should not overlook the percentage of the total demand, especially from the business as usual sector. Surprisingly, we thought most resources would be kind of like being drawn to the rebuild sector, but actually surprisingly, what we have found, the value of the business as usual sector also imposed a constraint on how fast we can build in the earthquake reconstruction sector. And others is pretty much we know very well in terms of the how fast the insurance claims can be settled, and the entire kind of like the sequential requirement, which means the logistics needed to coordinate with the different sectors, having an understanding about the priority of the reconstruction, and then planning for the different services in horizontal sector to be rebuilt first, and then can be followed by the residential sector repairs and rebuilds. So there's planning sequential requirement needed over there. And of course, labor supply and productivity, and plus the wage inflation. So I want to highlight that the labor supply always is a problem for the rebuild sectors, not only in New Zealand, but we also have observed in any other countries, which always lead to the unpleasant result is the wage inflation or the cost escalation in the rebuild sector. Then we try to look at what are the critical links that actually if we change certain links, like what I mentioned, if we change the way how the construction sector can perceive the construction demand, and the results of the time pass can be completely different. So we found regulatory changes are so important because of the changed the building code and the building standard after the quake, posed the changes of the technical capacity landscape in New Zealand. Critical links are information links. Things pretty much to do how the construction sector can really adjust itself in terms of how it can correctly perceive the information, the construction pipeline information from the government, and also the perceived timing. In general, there's a sense that there's still a lack of visibility of the reconstruction timelines, which means there's a time lag between the agents reporting like the reconstruction pipelines and it became real construction, which means the eventuation process always has a delay. And that caused actually the oscillation over time in the system. So I will quickly go through this. I think what we have observed from the stage 1 is the reconstruction driven by regulation insurance process. The oscillation type of system behavior shows the unstable response actually from the construction sector. As I said, there's always a delay in the demand landing for reconstruction, which actually causes the incorrect demand perception in the construction sector. Also, a piece of very important information we want to give to the construction sector, which has been involved in the reconstruction and play a major role in earthquake reconstruction, is that we need to have a better information reporting system, which means we don't use lagging metrics. That can really help the entire reconstruction process to at least that can really help have the future to speed up any recovery process. So we have recently published very nice, neat piece of article in the Brains Build magazine. So if you're interested, feel free to go to have a read. So now it takes us to the phase 2. So phase 2 is more about, now we have pretty much understand how the system, a building stock can change from the damaged state to the recovery state, and what are actually underlying mechanisms at play. But we want to also understand, does that also apply to the infrastructure sector? If it is, and to what extent each critical factor can play a role in influencing the infrastructure recovery time. So we have undertaken quite extensive field trips to both Christchurch and Kaikōura. Not only understand those critical factors, what does that mean for the infrastructure sector, but also understand it's more about what are the different involvement of various groups and what they perceive about their involvement. So I took my lovely master students and E4 students to Christchurch and Kaikōura. We stayed there for nearly a month. So we did very extensive interviews with all the different agencies in both Christchurch and Kaikōura. So this is a general overview about who we have talked to. So really big thanks to both SCIRT, Christchurch City Council, Kaikōura District Council, and NCTIR for facilitating us with the data collection. So this gives you a snapshot about after we have done interviews, we thought we really need to quantify. Quantification is a key. How do we quantify how much each critical factor identified in the first stage would really influence the recovery time in infrastructure? So we designed a simple questionnaire survey based on the previous findings, and then we distributed the survey to following organizations, including Engineering New Zealand, the Canterbury branch, Contractors Federation of New Zealand, Lifelines Group, and also Aerocon New Zealand, also through other personal contacts. So we had a sample of 100 respondents, and we received 58 responses. So the snapshot about who are the respondents to the questionnaire survey and what kind of businesses they were associated with. So I will show the results. So we actually asked a question, like both in the interview and also in the survey, about what they think about the pace of infrastructure recovery in Christchurch to start with. So you can see that the majority of people, 44%, actually thought the recovery of infrastructure in Christchurch was very fast. And also, the same number of respondents think that they have mixed feeling. They said certain parts was very speedy, whereas other parts were not, and due to certain reasons. But in general, this agreement towards a fast recovery by the council and the government people, a majority of the design and contractor groups actually perceived the recovery process to be a mixed. They had a mixed feeling about the recovery. So not really too fast, also not too slow. So only a very small number of people thought it was actually perceived as slow. So we actually asked them about what challenges actually faced in the reconstruction of the infrastructure facilities. So we divided these challenges into the different stages. In the inspection and assessment stage, there was general sense that there was a lack of information with council-owned asset management system, which is pretty much to do with there was lack of information, the original data about the different utility services underground. So there was a lack of data. Then they had to do quite an extensive amount of work in terms of resurveying and gathering the data together and set up the database. In the financing stage, they reported, especially for the council, feel that procurement can be problematic, as we still use a traditional procurement model, so freeing the financing for the project allocation can be a little bit challenging. So in the decision-making stage, this is where they actually highlighted most challenges were coming from. The challenges in the scope establishment. They also mentioned about, so especially for the contractors' perspective, they perceived a lack of collaboration between different stakeholders because they actually at the end of the supply chain, so they were the people in the end of the construction process. So they bear a lot of risk in terms of if there was a lack of collaboration among the stakeholders at the preceding procedures. And then so that shifted a lot of risks to the contractors. And also there was some reporting results from the contractor's perspective. Is more about lack of stakeholder engagement. It's pretty much between the contractors and subcontractors. So they did mention about alliance model used for SCIRT and NCTIR was a very good model that bring together everyone, but somehow subcontractors felt they left behind. So they thought if they can also be part of the conversation, also as well as the suppliers, because the supply chain efficiency also can take a toll on the reconstruction scheduling. So they did mention that suppliers and subcontractors, they should also be part of the conversation. when it comes to adjustment, it's more about, the planning needed prior to the construction. So I think they have a very different opinions across board. So I just want to highlight a few. It's more about, for instance, the yellow shows, yellow bars actually shows the opinions reported from a contractor's perspective. So you actually can say, because they are the people who will, in the end, do all the physical reconstruction work. So they really care about if anything happening prior to the construction can really affect them. So it's not actually surprising. Their responses always kind of like, to us, something like it's more complaining about what kind of challenges they have faced. They did mention about this very quick turnover in the companies, also to do with so fatigue, burnout, and also like lack of accommodation in Christchurch. So many other reasons. They found it's very difficult to maintain the staff and also keep the morale high. And also not surprising here, you can see the earthquake fatigue really play a toll on many businesses. So a lot of businesses actually in the end fed up with the involvement in the rebuild sector. They withdrawn from the rebuild sector. Then they went to the business as usual, because for them the perceived the risk is lower. So when it comes to the physical reconstruction stage, the quality issue in the construction finishes was really a concern for the councils. They did mention there was reported a number of rework or defects issues with the PMO managed residential projects, but also it's more about for the council, the asset owners also facing a challenge in terms of deciding to what extent the resilience should be achieved and how fast and how much it can cost. To what extent the resilience can be accepted also by the different stakeholders. So the interviews and also the questionnaire surveys also highlighted the good practice initiatives that actually drove up the speed of recovery. So I think I just listed all these good practice initiatives from top 1 to top 10. Okay, so you can tell that, so I wouldn't go through, but so I think if you really want to go into the details, please feel free to later refer to our final report. But I just want to highlight on the right, the different phases of the reconstruction process. But there's a general sense about the exposure to the delay is to do with the financing claim settlement stage, as well as the construction stage. So they actually proceed for the financing and claims settlement stage and the construction stage, there's more risks and there's more time delay factors. Also, we categorize the learnings, from different perspectives for the designers, contractors, government officials, and council staff. So I also wouldn't go too much into the details, but I think I want to highlight we run the 2 focus groups with both Christchurch City Council and also Kaikōura District Council. So the common sense or common notion from those 2 focus groups was that it's actually really, before we set off any reconstruction work, it's critical to understand the different drivers of stakeholders and also managing different expectations. So they also did mention about in terms of the procurement model, and also in terms of how they can perhaps going forward for the future reconstruction work, whether the procurement model, which is the treasury traditional procurement model, can be more improved, so that they not only have the design and build and plus all the different stakeholders and clients all involved in the alliance team, but it's also they mentioned about it would be also ideal to include the subcontractors and or even the suppliers as the early contractor involvement kind of regime in the procurement. Also, this general recommendation, I think, is from the council people that they also had fatigue. They also had burnout. So a lot of people actually who used to work for council also moved on. A lot of people who used to be seconded from different ministries to SCIRT or to EQR all have moved on. But so, which means we actually pretty much, if we don't retain the knowledge and people's expertise and experiences in the rebuild, we will lose this knowledge. So it's critical. We can have a more kind of like coherent database across not only the engineering and construction sector, but also the decision-making sector, to make sure that we, for instance, they did mention about if we can set up a database platform that can have all the contact details of those people who have the earthquake recovery experience. So if anything happens, for instance, in Kaikōura, earthquake recovery experience, the setup of NCTIR is pretty much based on the word of mouth. So the majority of the people who worked for Kaikōura were actually from the SCIRT office. So that was a blessing to Kaikōura. But it's only because when the Kaikōura earthquake happened, so the Christchurch reconstruction was nearly completion. So, but what if in the future, when everyone's memory fades off, and how we, and then there's another event happening, how we can make sure we can reach out these people with the knowledge and experience in the past can actually contribute to the future recovery planning. So we also did some comparison between the Kaikōura earthquake and Christchurch earthquake, and I think I'm running out of time, but I quickly wrap up. So you can go through my slides later if you want. So we did a comparison between even the different alliance models, and also identified the most critical factors affecting the pace of infrastructure recovery. Top one, hey, I want to draw your attention, is the technical capability of the engineering professionals. But I think so, what is QuakeCoRE is doing, Engineering New Zealand MB is addressing this problem now. Second one is competency, productivity of contractors involved, availability of construction manpower, and also information system. This is what I mentioned. So this actually repair scope variation, which means gaining more clear understanding about the scope of the reconstruction undertaking. Uncertainty is something we cannot really control. So I want to highlight actually at least top 5. So you can see that the majority actually thinks what really affected the pace of infrastructure recovery lie with the capability of the engineering and the construction sector. They also suggested several other additional critical factors. So now it comes to quantification. As we run the structure equation model, so you can see that all these different weights gives us the understanding about at the different stages, how, to what extent each critical factor contribute to the reconstruction process delay. all the time delay. So I think this structural equation modeling can be a foundation for the future if we ever want to say how we can change the different critical factors, and then to make sure that we can achieve an ideal reconstruction curve. So I'll possibly stop here. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. And also just final note to say that I'm also heading to, currently on sabbatical leave, so I'm also heading off to Japan very soon to also gain another understanding about how the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami reconstruction has progressed over time and how much, it's the cost variations. So the future plans to make the comparison between the Japan and the New Zealand, so we can get more insights and learn certain things we can learn from Japan. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alice. Ken has asked me to take over the thank you and any questions. We've gone over a little bit over time, so maybe just a couple of minutes if there are immediate questions from anyone listening in. If not, I'll direct any questions to Alice. Alice, will you be at the annual meeting?
Oh, sorry, David, I'm actually on sabbatical leave. So I will be in Japan and the States for the second half of the year. So I'm sorry, I'm not able to attend.
I fully understand, and we wish you the best with that. But any questions for now, or maybe Alice would be up for people emailing questions to her. So
yes.
But so questions from anyone? It's all very quiet.
Alice, I'll ask a quick question. This is Caroline, not Justin. Thanks for the presentation. Just in terms of the, sorry, I've got music playing in the background. I'm at home with people on school holidays. Just in terms of the GDP cost of the Canterbury earthquakes, we hear varying numbers bandied around on that, and you quote there 40 billion US. That seems higher than I've heard about in the past. I just wondered if you could clarify the cost there, and also what role insurance played in that net cost.
Sorry, I think somehow. Hello? Hi, Caroline.
Sorry, can you not hear me, Alice?
I think somehow it just suddenly stopped. Let me see. I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure if we've got time to.
Yep.
Okay.
That's all okay?
Yep.
Yep, I was just asking about the net cost of the Canterbury earthquakes at 40 billion US on your table. Could you clarify that? It seems more than I'm familiar with. Perhaps I haven't heard more recent figures.
Oh, yeah. I think the initial estimate was 10 billion. That was pretty much immediately after the February 2011 earthquake. And then it changed to 20 billion 6 months later. So the figure I showed you was actually from, I can give you the source. It's actually the officially recorded number that's also being considered as the latest from the government report. They changed it to $40 billion. Yeah. So I think I haven't seen any update about how much in total the recovery has cost. But I think that was the only official figure, the latest one I can get.
Thank you, Alice. As people may need to go to others, I'll just take this time to thank you very much for your presentation. Sorry, we will miss you at the QuakeCoRE meeting, but we will see you many places in the future, and we look forward to seeing more of your work. So thank you very much. Very interesting. And if you've got your final report, maybe send it to the system and we'll make sure others can get it.
Okay, I will. Yeah. Thank you
very much.